Hi, good morning, afternoon, evening, depending on where you are. I just wanted to let you know that I am Mrs. Burgee and I am going to be teaching you a lesson today about trying to find out what the central message is or what the lesson is in a fable or folk tale. And before I do that, I know you watched a Nearpod lesson yesterday that kind of gave you some of the elements that went into understanding what a fable is. And I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about that, and then I wanted to show you the differences between fables, folktales, and fairy tales. So one of the things I want to say is all fables, folktales, and fairy tales are definitely all fiction in that genre. And in a fable, we find that the main character is usually an animal. There's probably more animals in these stories. And one of the characters can be a trickster. That is, a trickster is somebody that tricks you. And with these animals that are in these stories, they're talking animals. So that is what we call something like personification, where the animal takes on human-like qualities. So that's where we get our talking animals from. And that word again is personification. Also find that the author, I've erased part of my board, these stories are written, there's authors that go along with them. And these are stories, one of the fables that are most famous, I think, are probably from Aesop. Many of you may have heard of Aesop's fables. It's got lots of books on there, or lots of stories within it. And they try to teach a lesson to you. The moral or the lesson is something that you want to learn, and it may or may not be stated within the story itself. Sometimes they do a lot of stating them afterwards, and you'll notice that in one that I'm going to read to you today. A folk tale, and you may have also be thinking of like tall tales, such as I'm thinking of Paul Bunyan and Johnny Appleseed. Those are types of folk. A tall tale is a type of folk tale. And sometimes they usually have humans in them. They have animals. Sometimes the animals talk, sometimes they don't. But one of them has something, maybe, I don't want to say a superpower, but they have some sort of power or wisdom maybe that others don't have. These stories were actually not written. The stories, folk tales, go back into different types of cultures. And they were stories that were orally said from generation to generation. And then eventually, as we have them now, they're actually in books. But they were presented orally and passed down through generations, and other people just telling the story, being storytellers without paper. There is usually a lesson in a folk tale as well, but it's not always stated, so you have to dig a little bit deeper. A folk tale that I'm thinking of off the top of my head is The Boy Who Cried Wolf. That would be a folk tale. He doesn't actually have any superpower or anything like that, but there is a lesson that's learned within that, and it has human and animals in it. The other one that I wanted to talk to you, I know we did some lessons earlier in the year. Let me move my board a little bit so you can see it. On fairy tales, where we did some comparing and contrasting fairy tales. Fairy tales are fiction, and fairy tales are pretty much about fairies and magic and magical worlds. There are stories that are always made up. There's magical creatures in them, things that we wouldn't see every day. The one thing about fairy tales is that they're always showing how good and evil always kind of conflict each other. Cinderella, for example, is a fairy tale where we've got Cinderella and she has evil stepsisters and an evil stepmother. So Cinderella is more portrayed as somebody that's very good, and the stepsisters, as I said, evil, they're portrayed as being evil. You might think of Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, others like that. So I'm going to read a story to you today, and it is called The Tortoise and the Hare. And one of the things I wanted to let you know, because some people say, oh, the rabbit and the turtle. And you might have heard it as the rabbit and the turtle if you've heard this one before. But there are some differences. A hare actually is, make sure you guys can see this, sorry. A hare is actually, and a rabbit have a lot of similarities to them. A hare is generally larger, it has bigger feet and longer ears. And they have a little bit different markings to their body as well. They usually have some black to them, probably to help them with camouflaging. And then something I found out about them that I didn't know that I thought was kind of interesting is that like when a hare is born, it actually has fur and its eyes are open, but when a rabbit is born, they don't have fur and their eyes are closed. So just a little extra information there. And then a tortoise and a turtle, they're both reptiles, but a tortoise lives on land and a turtle spends most of its life living in water. It does come out from time to time, but most of its life is spent in water. So I'm going to go ahead. So I want to talk to you. We're going to look at some things. We're going to talk about who the main characters are in this story, Tortoise and the Hare. And we're going to look at different events that happen, almost like our beginning, middle, end. But these are going to be important events that happen that lead us to what the moral or the lesson is. And then I'm going to talk to you when we find out what the moral or lesson is, some examples that I might be able to give you to help you understand and how you can put it into your own life. And if you want to, you can always send me a message and tell me about something that you've done that could portray the lesson in this story. So the tortoise and the hare, I'm going to read, this is from Aesop, from Aesop's Fables. The hare was once boasting of his speed before the other animals. I have never been beaten, he said. When I put forth my full speed, I challenge anyone to race with me. The tortoise said quietly, I'll accept your challenge. That's a good joke, said the hare. I could dance around you all the way. Keep your boasting until you've won, said the tortoise. Shall we race? So a course was fixed and the start was made. The hare darted almost out of sight at once, but soon stopped to show his contempt for the tortoise. He lay down to have a nap. The tortoise plodded on, and when the hare awoke from his nap, he saw the tortoise just near the winning post, and he couldn't run up in time to save the race. Then the tortoise said, slow but steady progress wins the race. And I wanted to apologize to you, boys and girls. All of my books are at school, so I didn't have it, so I just had to pull something up on my screen, and I actually did want to read it to you instead of having someone else read it to you. So I want to go back here and also let you know that there's a slide that goes with this that you have a link to, so you can kind of walk through it again if you wanted to. It also has the story on it. And you might want to use this for later in the week when you're doing some other fables or folk tales. All right, so get my marker. I want you to tell me who the main character is, or in this case, main characters. I know we have secondary characters, but I think they're both main characters in here. So anybody want to tell me who they think the main character is? Exactly. One of them is who? The tortoise. Okay. And the other one would be, yes, very good. Don't shout out. I can hear you shouting. The hare. Make sure we take turns. All right, so we want to go back and we want to think about what happened at the beginning, the middle, and the end. What were some key events that happened? Well, I remember at the very beginning, the hare was boasting, and boasting is another word for bragging. So he was boasting about being very fast, and he knew that he didn't think anybody else could win. Well, let me back up for just a second. I want you to think about the tortoise and the hare and how I was describing some things about those animals, and why I did that was because most of the time, if you would think about, a rabbit and a turtle, or a tortoise and a hare, I should say, tortoises are very slow moving animals. They're not very fast. And a rabbit or a hare is a very fast moving animal. So that's where those two characters come into play for this story, to make it a little easier to understand the moral or the lesson. So our key event at the very beginning was that we heard the hare boasting or bragging about how fast he was. So I would write that down in one of my I put it in my first block of my key event. So the hare was bragging about how fast he was. In this case, I don't have a whole lot of room, so I'm just going to put the Hare was bragging about his speed. And I'm just taking notes. Doesn't have to be complete sentences, just notes. Another key event was that I found that the tortoise wanted the hare challenged anybody, and the tortoise takes on the challenge. So I want to say that tortoise takes on the race challenge. Okay. And then finally, at the end of the story, I find out that the hare has fallen asleep because he was trying to kind of like just be nice to the tortoise, because he thought for sure there was no way that the tortoise was ever going to win. So he figures, oh, I have enough time. That's going to take forever. He's just plodding along slowly because he's so slow that I can just take a nap for a while and I'll still win. So at the end of the story, though, we find out that we know that the hare falls asleep, or the hare takes a nap, you could say that. And the tortoise wins. He crosses the finish line before the hare does. So at the very last thing that I said in the story was that the tortoise said back to the hare was, slow but steady progress wins the race. So the moral of the story, or the lesson of the story, is slow and steady. Sorry, that doesn't show up very well. Slow and steady wins the race. Okay. Great, Mrs. Burgee, that's fantastic, but I'm really not sure that I understand what that means. Yeah, I got it. The turtle's slow, the rabbit's fast, the rabbit falls asleep, turtle wins. Woohoo. Well, I want you to think about it this way. Think about jumping into some kind of activity that you want to do, even a test, a project that you have in school, or even just, a sheet of paper that your teacher hands you to fill out a couple questions. And you get your instructions and you want to be the first one done because you want to go on and do that next thing. Well, you turn your paper in and maybe you didn't do so hot, or maybe you didn't do things as neatly or something, and your teacher returns it to you and is like, I want you to put a little bit more effort into this, make it look pretty good, what have you. But if you would have done it the first time, slowly taking your time at it, then you would have had something, maybe a better product. So I kind of think about this too, like for myself, I think about, I really want to get in shape. And if I go work out, I'm going to get in there. I'm going to lift weights and I'm going to run on the treadmill and I'm going to go really fast and all these things. And then I know exactly what's going to happen to me the next day is I'm going to be really, really sore. And when I'm really, really sore, the last thing I want to do is work out again. So it's going to take me a couple days till I can get back into lifting weights or running or whatever. But if I start out and I think, I want to get in shape, so maybe if I just take small steps to get there, I'm going to be better off. So I've decided, instead of going in and lifting all these weights and thinking that I can do all these things, which I will be able to do eventually, but not right away. So I want to take my time with something. So I want to be slow when I do it. And I want to be consistent when I do it. I want to be steady. I want to make sure that I'm doing it so I get the job done. So for me, I might just start off with smaller weights and eventually I'll get to heavier weights, but I won't be as sore the next day. So I'm going to want to go back and do more. So I think that can help you a little bit with understanding what slow and steady wins the race. You are welcome to give me some ideas of, or a time when you felt you did something that was slow and steady to win a race. And the race isn't always something physical that you're doing. The race is something that is, you know, your activity or your project that you're working on. And how can you make something be really good and that you're really proud of if you just take your time at it? So again, this is on your Google Slides and in its learning if you want to take a little look at it for some review. Feel free, there's an empty slide that I've put on there that you could use during the week. You can put it on a piece of paper. You don't have to type it in on the slide, but it's there for you for the week with your key events, main characters, your key events, and the moral or lesson. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'm sorry I didn't have any flashy pictures or anything, but I'm doing what I can to get through, and I hope you guys are too. I miss you all and can't wait to see your smiling faces.